Good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're learning Maseches Kesubos, Daf Mem Aleph, starting at the top line, brand new Mishnah, and we'll go until the end of this parak, the parak of Elu Na'aros. This whole parak, we've been speaking about the psukim and chumash that discuss the knas for when a man violates a woman, and here what we're going to be doing is discussing whether or not a person who admits that they did this crime on their own, how that affects the knas. We're familiar with a principle in Shas referred to as modeh b'knas, that when one admits to an act that they have done that brings about a knas, the therefore is that they then don't have to pay the knas. That's what Rashi says on the top of the page, second line. Modeh b'knas is pater, and that's based on a pasuk. So let's see how this plays out in the Mishnah and the ensuing halachic nafkaminas, as we'll see in the Gemara. Ha'omer, if a man says, Patisi es bito shel ploni, I seduced the daughter of a particular person, the halacha is mishalem busha upgam al pi atzmo, based on atzmo, based on his own words, he will be mishalem boshes and pigam. He'll pay not the knas, but he'll pay the financial burdens of boshes and pigam, which we discussed yesterday. However, the ein mishalem knas, when a person is modeh that they did this crime, because they were modeh b'knas, they're pater from the knas. And here we see a clear bifurcation between mamon and knas. Mamon you can pay al pi atzmo based on your own words, but a knas cannot be paid al pi atzmo. Line 3, ha'omer ganavti, and the meforshim here add tavachti b'macharti, referencing kefil and daled behei. Says the Gemara, if a person says, I admit I stole your animal, and or I shechted it, and or I sold it, then mishalim es hakeren al pi atzmo, I only pay the principal, but I don't pay any of the knas payments, the doubles and the quadruples and the fives. The ein mishalim tashlumi kefil v'tashlumi arba v'chamisha, same idea. We pay mamon based on our own testimonies, our own self-declarations. However, we don't pay a knas. If a person says, Hemis shori es ploni, my shiur killed a person. Oh, it killed shoro shel ploni. I either killed Ruvain or I killed the shiur of Ruvain. My animal killed the shiur of Ruvain. Hareza mishalim al pi atzmo. He will pay the principal costs of the damages caused. What if he says, Hemis shori avdo shel ploni? My shiur killed the eved of someone, so that's different. There's no payment at all. Ein mishalim al pi atzmo, because as Rashi highlights on the fourth line and fifth lines of Rashi, Rashi says, V'hareini chayev shloshim sela. The Torah gives a knas for that. It's not what the principal damage is. It's simply what it is. It's a knas of 30, and that's a knas, and therefore, ein mishalim al pi atzmo. And the Mishnah concludes, Zeh haklal, here is the general principle, kol ha-mishalim yeser al masha hizik. If there is a payment that is upon a person greater than the damage that he caused, eino mishalim al pi atzmo. The halacha in our Mishnah is that yes, your admittance to a crime that you've done will incur, based on your own self-declarations, any momentous charges that are based on the actual costs of damage incurred. However, anything that's above that, anything that's a knas, anything that's a tax, none of that will be brought about by one's own admission. If Eidim catch you dead in the water, you pay with a knas. We're only talking about in this Mishnah, I'm the guilty party, and I go into the police station and I say, here's what I did. Or I should say, I go into Bezdin. Bezdin will say, any momentous payments, any momentous, which is costs of damage payments, you're going to be held accountable for. But because you were modeh b'knas, if you admitted it on your own, you're pater from all of the knas. So asks the Gemara on Mem Aleph Amud Aleph, 12 lines down, I don't understand. Why did you start with the case of Patisi on the top line of the seduction case? We know that there's another case that's very similar, which is the case of Ones. So why didn't our Mishnah speak about the case of Ones? Asks the Gemara, Bilisni onasti. Why didn't our Mishnah include the case of a man who self-declares, I violated this woman? Says the Gemara, great question. Really, lomi boyakam. Lomi boya kamar means we really didn't need to say this. Lomi boya onasti. I don't need the Mishnah to teach me the case where someone self-declares that he violated a woman, because there, deloka pagim la, there's no flaw in her. She didn't do anything wrong in that case. And there, Demishalim Boshe Subkam al Piatmo, that I could understand. However, Aval Patisi, in a case where there's a seduction, in the end, she agreed to be involved in the act. And therefore, the Kapagimla, that is a pagam in her. She should have been stronger. Yosef HaTzadik earned the term tzaddik because he was stronger. That's the rarity. Many people fail in scenarios of seduction. So says the Gemara, we might have thought that in the case of Patisi, where a man claims that he seduced a woman, and because she agreed, she acquiesced, therefore she has a pagam in her, therefore ema lo mishalim al pi atzmo. We might have thought that the halachos were different by the case of Patisi, and therefore maybe we would have thought that the laws were different. So therefore, our Mishnah teaches us in the structure of Lomi Boya Kamar. We left out the obvious case. We specifically taught the case that needed the Chiddush Kamash Malon, that we treat the case of Pitui and the case of Ones as the same in regards to self-declarations. Says the Gemara, a quarter of the way down, Masnisin Deloki Haitana. Our Mishnah is not like the following Tana. What does the next Mishnah say? It's a brayse actually. The Tanya, Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda Omer Mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda says in the name of Rabbi Shimon, Af boshes upkameinu mishalem al piatzma. If a man walks into Bezdin and says, I did something wrong, I seduced this particular woman, you don't even pay the pigam and the boshes. Why would you not pay the pagam and the boshes? Because not every Joe Schmo who walks into Bezdin is necessarily telling the truth. Lo kol heimenu sheyivkom bito shel ploni. Not every guy is believed to walk into Bezdin and say, by the way, I seduced your daughter. You bring me Adim before you talk bad about my child. Bring me Adim. The guy walks in on his own. He self-declares, I seduced this woman, and therefore he has to instantly write a check for pagam and boshes. Let's verify. Why is our Mishnah taking everything at face value? And we're automatically blemishing this woman, even though we don't even know that it happened. His own self-declaration is enough to damage her? Who says? Amar le Rav Papa, what if she's a smart girl? Amar le Rav Papa le Abaye, what if nichala l'didamai? She says, you want to say you slept with me and write me a check? Okay, write me a check. No problem. How much am I worth? And he writes a check for the pagam and the boshes. Nothing happened, but she's playing the card. This guy walks into Bezdin and says, I seduced Reuven's daughter. Reuven's daughter's like, no, you didn't, but I'll take your money. So he writes a check for boshes and pagam. Is that allowed? Says the Gemara, no, because dilma lo nichale le'aviha, because the father doesn't want to have a daughter about whom they say that she's a be'ula now because she was seduced by this person. All right, what about nichale le'aviha mai? What if the father's on board with his little ploy? Shimon walks into Bezdin and says, Patisi es bito shel Reuven. And she says, no, you didn't, I'll take the check. The father says, good idea, sweetheart, let's split the profits. And the father's all good with it, says the Gemara, no dice. Because Dilma lo nicha lehu b'nei mishpach. Still, it's a negative on the family. It's like all the brothers, when Dinah was violated, all the brothers were angry. Shimon and Levi desecrated a whole city because of that. So obviously, it's not good for the family. What about nicha lehu b'nei mishpacha? Everybody sits down at the table, family meeting. Family, we're gonna make some bank tonight because all of a sudden, Patisias Bito Shel Ruvain, the whole family sits around the table, Givaldik, let's make a couple $1,000. Says the Gemara, no way. What? Because it's not possible that there is a woman who wasn't violated, who's trying to collect on the cash of the boshes and the pigam, and there isn't someone in the family unit who cares. Someone should say pasnisht. It's not right to say that you were violated when you weren't just to make money. Mutter, but it's not right. It's not frum. It's not the right thing to do. Therefore, we don't allow it. It's also possible that it's Motzi Shemra, but here, it's not like there were Adim. He went into Bezdin on his own. This guy is Modeh B'Knas. The Motzi Shemra is a Knas, so there he wouldn't pay the Knas in that case. So here we're talking about a case where the Boshes and Pagam should be paid. She's like, great, I'll take your Venmo here. Just send it over. But it didn't even happen. Fine. Says the Gemara, quoting from our Mishnah, what about the case, Ha'omer Ganafti? We're just about halfway down on Mem Aleph Amar Aleph at the 2 dots. Our Mishnah spoke about a case of Ganafti and Mocharti and Tavachti. So we said, Mishalim Esakeren, the only damages that are paid in such a case is the principal losses, the actual loss of damages, but no Knas payments are made when a person makes the claim on their own with self-declaration. Okay, now we're getting into a Shas Sugya. As we know, Kesubos is referred to as Shas Katan. There is a principle in halacha called Chatzi Nezek. Chatzi Nezek is a payment that comes about when, let's say, I own an animal that is otherwise a calm, domesticated, reasonable animal. This animal then does some damage. So the halacha in Chumash is that this person has to pay Chatzi Nezek. Are they paying Chatzi Nezek because really they should pay full, but the Torah was chas on that person, so they pay half? Or is it from the other way? Really, they should have paid 0, but the Torah was makbid on that person. Let's put it into other words. Is chatzi nezek a mamonis payment? When we say that my docile, calm animal killed an animal, Phil, your chayiv chatzi nezek, is that mamon? I'm paying for damages, or is it a knas? It's the slap on the wrist for your irresponsibility. Which one is it? We've already learned in our Mishnah this bifurcation between mamonis and knas. Mamon is what I owe you because I caused damage. Knas is the Torah or halacha saying, you were irresponsible, and now I'm going to punish you for it. Not just the cost, but a punishment. So which one is it? Says the Gemara, Itmar, this is a machlokas in the Amoraim. When we say palga nizka, palga in Aramaic, of course, is half. When we're talking about a case of chatzi nezek, what is it? Rav Papa Amar palga nizka mamona. When we have a punishment of chatzi nezek, that is mamonis. You cause damage, you have to pay for your damage. Only half, but you have to pay for your damage. However, Rav Huna B'Reid Rav Yeshua Amar Palga Nizka is knasa. Actually, it's the slap on the wrist consequence. You're not just paying for your damages, you're paying a punishment for what happened. How do each of these Amoraim substantiate their claim? The Gemara says, Rav Papa Amar Palga Nizka Mamona. How do we know that in the case of an animal that is a tam, a really domesticated, calm animal, how do we know that palga nizka is mamona? Because fundamentally, Rav Papa holds as follows: Kasavar stam shvarim lav bechezkas shimor kaimi. The average cow, the average ox, is not considered to be shimor. Ubedinhu demishalin kule. And because these animals are really not considered to be shimor, they're not considered to be guarded, you should have guarded them, but you did a bad job. Really, you owe the full cost of the damage. Ubedinhu demishalim kule, because you were irresponsible and your animal caused the damage of, let's say, $100. But v'rachmanahu dechayis ilave deakati lo ied Torah. But the Torah was lenient on you because your animal is not yet ied, from the word muad. Your animal is not yet known to be a dangerous animal. So here's the split. Really, animals are not considered shamor. But your animal's a tam. It's not yet a muad. So we're kind of like in a twilight zone. So really, you owe everything. Because you damaged 100, you should pay 100. But the Torah was chas on him because his animal's still a tam and not a muad. So Rav Papa is of the opinion that chatzi nezek is a mamonis type of payment. However, Rav Huna B'Reid Rav Yeshua, 2/3 of the way down, he says, Omar, palga nizka knasa. When we're talking about chatzi nezek, really that's a knas. How does he approach the status of an ox? Kasavar, he holds stam shvar bechezkas shimor kaimi. Really, oxen are considered to be naturally shamor. They're considered to be guarded. They don't need extra protection. Ubedinhu delo lishlam klal. And really, because animals are assumed to be protected, you really owe zero. But v'rachmanahu dekanse, the rachmana, the Torah gives you the punishment, even though you owe zero. There's a punishment given to you. Kiheche de nintere leture. You should have still watched your animal better than what, even though there's no fundamental requirement, and really you owe zero. But you got to put a leash on him. You got to put a ball and chain so he doesn't go too far. And therefore, really you owe zero. So if you owe zero and you're paying money, what's that called? That's called a knas. Lemay nafkamina, our Mishnah. The difference is our Mishnah. If chatzi nezek is mamonis, then when a person self-declares, great, they're going to have to pay because it's mamonis. But if you self-declare on a knas, you're not allowed to pay. It's moda b'knas pater. So if we say chatzi nezek is mamonis, he has to pay with self-declarations. In the case of patisi as bito, or like at the end of our Mishnah where a person says, my animal killed your animal. But Masha'inkein, if it's a knas, really fundamentally you owe zero, but the Torah was makbid on him because he should have done better shimor. So then it would be considered a knas and he'd be pater. How do we paskin? Do we say chatzi nezek is mamonis? Or do we say chatzi nezek is knasa? And that's going to be the subject of our conversation from here until the end of the perek, which is where we're going to end today. And the Gemara gives us 2/3 of the way down at the 2 dots, a little bit more actually, 3/4 of the way down, gives us a little bit of a siman. Hizik, Ma, Vehemis, and Klal. And we'll see these brands within the 4 questions that the Gemara uses to try and solve this question of whether or not we say Chatzi Nezek is a Mammon issue or Chatzi Nezek is a Knas issue. Number 1, here's the Hizik language. Tnan, we have a Mishnah. This Mishnah is found in Maseches Bava Kama. The Mishnah writes 3 words. Hanizak v'hamazik b'tashlumin. The nizak, the one that's damaged, v'hamazik, the one who causes damage, they are both b'tashlumin. Why is the nizak b'tashlumin? The nizak is the one who had damage done to him. Why is he in the form of payment? Says the Gemara as follows: Bishlam alamanda amar palga nizka mamona. I understand, according to Rav Papa, who says that chatzi nezek is a mammon issue. Hainu deshayach nizak b'tashlumin. I could understand a case scenario where that's the case, because what did we say about Rav Papa? We said really he owes 100, but the Torah was chasan, so he only has to pay 50. What happens to the 50 that doesn't get paid? The nizak has to eat the loss. So the nizak is involved in his own tashlumin. He's owed 100. He has to eat 50. And the mazik pays the extra 50. So we could understand this Mishnah, which says, Hanizak v'hamazik b'tashlumin, according to the approach of Rav Papa, that says, Palga nizka is mamona. Ella, says the Gemara, Lamanda Amar Palga nizka knasa, according to the Shita Rav Huna Breda Rabbi Yoshua, who says that Chatzi Nezek is a knas. Hashta delavdi deka shakil b'tashlumin isei. How can you say there's tashlumin by the nizak? By the nizak, really, he's owed 0. But the Torah required of him within the framework of a knas to pay an extra 50. So Medina, the nizak, was owed 0 and he got 50. He's not involved in offsetting costs. The nizak hasn't paid a dime, and he shouldn't be paying a dime, and he won't pay a dime. So the Mishnah in Bava Kama that says Hanizak v'amazik b'tashlumin does not make sense, according to Rav Huna Breda Rabbi Yeshua, who holds that Chatzi Nezek is a knas. Says the Gemara, great question. Don't worry, lo nitzrecha ela lipchas nevela. What we're talking about is a reduction in the cost of the actual body of the animal. What does this mean? This means as follows. Let's say that the death, my animal killed your animal on January 1st. On that day in the market, the animal in his weight class was worth 100 pounds. What would Chatzi Nezek of 100 pounds be? 50, piece of cake. However, between the day the animal died on January 1st and the day that the carcass of that animal was set in the market was 10 days. In those 10 days, as we're familiar with our 401k accounts, the arrow's dropping sharply. So now 10 days later, this carcass is only worth $90. What's Chatzi Nezek on 90? 45. Who takes that loss of 5? On January 1st, it was worth 100, Chatzi Nezek is 50. On January 10th, it's worth 90, Chatzi Nezek is 45. That's a loss of $5, 5 zuz and 5 slang, whatever the units are. Says the Gemara, the Pchas Nevela is on the Nizak. Oh, so now we have a way to answer our Mishnah, even according to the Shita of Rav Huna Breda Rabbi Yoshua. We had said, Hanizak v'hamazik b'tashlumin. We asked, that only makes sense according to the Mammonist Shita, that Chatzi Nezek is Mammon. Why? What about Chatzi Nezek is Knas? The Gemara says, even in the world of Chatzi Nezek Knas, where really he's owed 0, but the Nizak's still going to have to pay the difference if there's a loss between the cost of the carcass on January 1st and the cost on the day of the carcass on January 10th, when the Ha'amada actually is put into place, and therefore all is well and good. We have no answer from our first question. Says the Gemara as a follow-up to this response, good answer. Good answer. Now we know that both shitas of Rav Papa and Rav Huna Breda of Yeshua are valid. However, Pchas Nevela Tanina, we already learned about Pchas Nevela. We already learned that the Nizak is going to be responsible for the lowering in the cost of the carcass from the day of the death to the day of the Ha'amada, the day of the assessment. Where did we learn this? Tashlume Nezek, Melamed, Shehabailim, Mitaplin Benevela. The Bailim are the ones who lose out on the Nevela. Okay, so if we already see that, why do we have 2 sources that indicate that the nizak is responsible to deal with the pechas nevela? Why is the damagee the one who has to be responsible for the loss and cost? Why do we need 2 sources for that? Says the Gemara, 2 lines before the wide lines, mem aleph amud aleph. The Gemara says chada b'tam v'chada b'muad. In one of these sources, the reason why we have a reference of pechas nevela by a nizak is to refer to a case of where the animal that did the damage was a tam, and in another case, the chada b'muad, where the animal that did the damage was a muad. V'tzricha, we need both of these sources, one to indicate to us that there's a pechas nevela status of the nizak by a tam, and the same by a muad. Why? And tam, if I only would have had a pchas nevela source for tam, mishum de'akati lo iyed. I would have said that the reason why the nizak is responsible is because this animal is not yet muad. Aval muad de'iyed, but a muad animal which already was, maybe emalo, he's too guilty, and therefore we wouldn't say that halacha is the same. V'yashmin and muad, if I only had the case of chas nevela by a muad, that's mishum de mishalim de kamishalim kule. That's because he's paying a full cost in the case of muad. Chatzi nezek's only a din by an animal that's tam, but by an animal that's a muad, he always pays kule. So therefore, maybe that the halacha would imply that the nizak has chas nevela only by a case of muad. Aval tam, who only pays chatzi nezek emalo, therefore tzricha, we need two sources for chas nevela, one by tam and one by muad. And this was a reference in the two dots above, where we had our little mnemonic of hizik. That was number one. Now we're going to go to the hizik mnemonic number two of ma. Says the Gemara Toshma. Let's try again. How do we know how we paskin? Do we say chatzi nezek is mamanis, or do we say chatzi nezek is knas? Do we hold like Rav Papa, or do we hold like Rav Huna Bered Rav Yoshua? Says the Gemara, we have a brisa. What does the brisa say? This is also in Bava Kama. No. Yes. The Gemara says, 4 lines from the bottom, ma bein tam lemuad. What's the difference between an animal that damages as a tam and an animal that damages as a muad? She'atam mishalim chati nezek migufo. The tam pays chati nezek migufo. Muad mishalim nezek shalim min aliyah. We're going to just go a little bit deeper here, not too deep, but it says here that that the difference between a tam and a muad is that when a tam causes damage, it pays chatzi nezek, but only migufo. So, for example, let's say that my small little goat kills a massive cow, $100 worth of damage, but my goat is only worth $60. I can't pay more than $60. It's not possible. Whatever the cost is of that animal is my maximum payment. So what if my damage is 100, but my goat's only $40? I cannot pay more than $40. That's not chatzi nezek. Chatzi nezek is 50. Yeah, the animal was a tam. We're going light on the owner of that animal, and he's only mishalim chatzi nezek migufo. However, umuad mishalim nezek shalim mino aliyah. When it comes to a muad, he has to pay full no matter what. So if it's 100, it's 100. Even if his animal's only 40, he has to pay. What's missing from this? Says the Gemara. The lok tani, what do we not see here? She'atam eno mishalim al piatzmo, that when it comes to a knas, that a tam doesn't pay knas. Umuad mishalim al piatzmo, but a muad does. So what does that indicate to us? Well, before we answer that question, take a look at Rashi's text of our Gemara. Rashi, 3 lines from the bottom, doesn't say velok tani. Rashi says, V'im isa. And if you want to say the palganizka knasa, if you want to say that palganizka is really a knas like Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, then Rashi says 3 lines from the bottom in the bold, nisni nami she'atamena mishalim al piatzmo mishalim al piatzmo. If you want to say that it's a knas, then you should list in this Mishnah in this brisa that we just quoted, that when it comes to knas, that there's no payment by a tam, by chatzi nezek. But that distinction was not referenced. So therefore, it must be that chatzi nezek is really mamo, because otherwise, had it been knas, we would have seen this distinction. Says the Gemara, not a good answer. Ton of a shiur. This is a well-known structural answer that we see throughout the Gemara. Whenever we see lists or distinctions in a Tanaic source, we always have to ask ourselves, is what we are seeing exhaustive or not? So the Gemara says here, it's not exhaustive. Ton of a shiur. Yes, this brisa speaks about one distinction, chatzi nezek migufo, and by a muad, it's always going to be shalem min ha'aliyah. Fine, but we don't have to list every distinction. Ton of a shiur. We had a brisa, but shiur, we left this thing out. We left out this distinction, and really, it's takatru. The chatzi nezek is knasa, not mamona. There's another way to understand it. Says the Gemara, if you're telling me that we left something out of this Mishnah, then usually when we leave out one thing from the distinctions, we leave out 2. So my shiur, the high shiur. What else was left out in addition to this that we left out? Says the Gemara, shiur chatzi kofer. One thing that was left out is chatzi kofer. What's chatzi kofer? Chatzi kofer is where my animal, there's a payment of my animal where a shor kills a human being. If my shor kills a human being, so the halacha is that, what did I even write here? I can't even read my own handwriting. That's why you shouldn't do any writing after a flight. Just stop writing. I can't even read my own handwriting. The Gemara says that when it comes to the owner of a muad, that he only has to pay a certain amount of money, has to be pay chatzi kofer. So it says the Gemara that was left out, because we don't see that distinction here between a tam and a muad. Says the Gemara, Imi shum chatzi kofer. If that extra thing that you're leaving out is chatzi kofer, that's not a good thing to leave out. Lav shiuru. That can't be what is necessarily left out, because as we turn to the top of Mem Aleph and Beis, we'll see that there's a shita that holds that it's not a distinction at all. Money, top of Mem Aleph Amud Beis, Rabbi Yossi Aglili Damar Tam Mishalim Chatzi Kofer. It's not just a muad animal that would pay Chatzi Kofer. It's even a tam. So therefore, this wouldn't be a distinction, and therefore, because there's no other distinction to be had, therefore we are stuck not having a good answer from answer number 2. And if you look back at our mnemonic at the 2 dots, you'll see that the third word is hemis, and that's where we are on the second line of Mem Aleph Amud Beis, which is Tashma. Hemis shori es ploni. If a man says that my shor killed this person, o shoro shel ploni, or the animal of ploni. So what did we say in our Mishnah? Hareze mishalim al piatzmo. My love betam, and that this would then imply that palga, that chatzi nezek is talking about mamanis. Why would it be that it's mamanis? Because he's mishalim al piatzmo. What does it mean that you're mishalim al piatzmo? It means that you're paying the cash value for the damage that you caused. Says the Gemara, lo, maybe our Mishnah was talking about a case b'muad. So says the Gemara, if that's true, aval b'tam, had it been that we were talking about a case of a tam, we would have said eino mishalim al piatzmo. If that's true, that if it was eino tam, he would not be mishalim al piatzmo. If that's true, then adatoni seifa avdo shel ploni, we should have made another distinction. Instead of the case of avdo shel ploni, where we say eino mishalim al piatzmo, niflog v'nisne b'dida. If what you're saying is true, then we should have had one source, not 2 cases, one case with a split. And that what should it have said? Bamed dvar mamurim b'muad aval tam mishalim al piatzmo. Yes, thank you. Aval tam eino mishalim al piatzmo. And because we don't see that distinction, that's a problem. So therefore, says the Gemara, you're right. But this Mishnah is not dealing with that. Says the Gemara, kula b'muad kamairi. Really, the whole Mishnah that our Mishnah is dealing with is talking about a muad, and it's not talking about a tam at all. And if you look at our Mishnah on the top of Mem Aleph Amud Aleph, it doesn't talk about a tam. I gave that framing about chatzi nezek. The Gemara gave references that possible ways to look at our Mishnah, but it's not mukhrach that our Mishnah is talking about a case of a tam. So that was answer number 3, case number 3, where we don't have an answer yet. Now let's get to case number 4, where we're actually going to answer our question based on this source as to whether or not we hold chatzi nezek is from the camp of mamanis or if it's from the camp of knas. What did we learn in our Mishnah? The last line of our Mishnah reads, and we're a quarter of the way down on Mem Aleph and Beis, Tashma ze haklal. Kol ha-mishalem yeser al ma shehizik. Anyone who pays more, anyone who's obligated to pay more than the damage that he caused, eino mishalim al piatzmo. This was what our Mishnah wrote. So says the Gemara, what's implied from that? Ha-pachos mima shehizik. If the amount of money that he's being charged is less than the amount that he did cause in damage. I caused $100 of damage. The bill that I got from Bezdin was $95. So then mishalim al piatzmo. And that shows you that we're talking about chatzi nezek being mamon, because you do pay if the amount of money is less than the total damage, equal to or lesser than the total damage. Says the Gemara, lo tema hapachos mima shehizik. Don't make that inference that it's hapachos mima shehizik. Elaima, ha-kima shehizik mishalim al piatzmo, that it should be as much, not less than, but as much. Aval pachos mai, what if it was in fact less? Maybe we would say eino mishalim al piatzmo, and therefore it is a knas case and not mamanis. So says the Gemara, had that been true, and it's not, had that been true, a third of the way down, listening, our Mishnah should have said, zehaklal kol she'eino mishalim kima shehizik. Anyone who doesn't pay exactly what the damages were, eino mishalim al piatzmo demashma pachos umashma yoser. That would have made sense in the mamanis realms, but because that isn't the case, tiyuvta v'hilchasa, we reject this, and therefore what we would say is v'hilchasa is palga nizka knasa. From our Gemara, it seems clear that a chatzi nezek is deemed a knas. This is going to be the nafkamina for our Mishnah. Because as mentioned, our Mishnah indicates, and Rashi highlights this explicitly, that when a person is modeh b'knas, he's pater. So if chatzi nezek is a knas, and I'm modeh to a knas, I'm the owner of a short tam, and I say my animal caused damage, so there's no knas in that case, because modeh b'knas is pater, and chatzi nezek, according to this, is a knas. The Gemara has a technical question with the way that the Gemara answered the question. What did the Gemara say? The Gemara had said that it was both tiyuvta and then followed by the words v'hilchasa. Tiyuvta v'hilchasa? Why do we need both of those? Tiyuvta, we understand. You rejected the possibility that chatzi nezek is mamonis. By definition, we know there's only one other option. Chatzi nezek must be a knas. Says the Gemara we do actually need both parts of this answer. Number one, that there's a tiyuvta, and number two, that there's a v'hilchasa. Why do we need to be ever so explicit and articulate? Halfway down on Mem Aleph and Mem Beis, the Gemara says in time of Ma'i Tosaf, what was the reason that we rejected the sheet of Chati Nezek as Mamona? Because Mishum Deloktani Kimashihizik. Because something was missing. It was an absence of the text in our Mishnah. Lo psikale, that's not super clear. And the reason it's not super clear is Kevan Deika Chati Nezek Tsuroros. Because there is another possibility of how to read a case of Chati Nezek, and that is a case of Chati Nezek Tsuroros. Have you ever been driving on the highway and the car in front of you kicks up a rock and it hits your windshield? We've all had that experience. Most of the time, it doesn't crack your windshield. Let's say it does. And now let's go back 1,000 years, 200 years. Let's say your animal is running and it kicks up a rock and it tears a hole in the canvas of the chariot behind you. That's called Chati Nezek Tsuroros. Chati Nezek Tsuroros has a halacha l'moshe Sinai status that a person has to pay Chati Nezek. Okay? So had it been that our Mishnah simply didn't say this case of Kimasha Hizik, I might have had a misunderstanding about Chati Nezek. So therefore, I had to add in a little bit more. The Hilchasa Gemirila de Mamonahu, we know that the case of Chati Nezek is treated as Mamona, Mishum Hachi Loktani. And that's why we weren't able to say so clearly what the din is. And therefore, we needed the Hilchasa to follow up for us. So we had this 1-2 punch of the Tiyuvta followed by the Hilchasa. And it seems from our Gemara here on Mem Aleph and Beis that we paskin that Chati Nezek is a knas. And says the Gemara, "V'hashta de amris palga nizka knasa." Now that you're saying when we have a case of Chati Nezek that it's a knas, so then if hai kalba, if a person has a dog, to achal imri that ate a small animal, v'shunr achal tarnagoli, or a cat that ate a tarnagol, if rav revei, if it ate an animal that's way bigger than its size, so meshunahu v'lo magbinan bebavel. That's meshuna. That's not normal, and that money won't be collected in Bavel. And the reason why the Mefarshim explain is because in Bavel they didn't have as expert of dayanim as they did in Eretz Yisrael. In Israel, that would have been different. Aval zutre, but had this cat or dog killed an animal that was relative to its own size, was a normal catch. Like, so let's say we see a cat killing a bird, which is a relatively normal thing in nature, normal, that's urchehu umagbinan. And in such a case, they would collect. What would happen in the case where my cat kills someone's very, very large, an ostrich, abnormal murder? An ostrich is the largest bird on the world. The tafas, if I, as the owner of that ostrich, took money from the cat owner, says the Gemara, lo mafkinan mine, I can keep that money. You did hurt my animal. We just don't have the right bestin to go through the process. But if I took that money out of your property, all is well and good. If one says to the other, hey, we need this case adjudicated properly, we're going to Eretz Yisrael for a din Torah about the ostrich, no problem. You have to go, the lo azil. If the person who caused the damage isn't willing to go to Eretz Yisrael for the din Torah, mishamtinanle, we put him into shamta, we put him into cherem. And says the Gemara, the truth is bein kach ubein kach, either way, we still put him into some kind of cherem, mishamtinanle, da'amrinanle, salik hezekcha. You need to remove your animal. Your animal is a danger. You know, sometimes you see in these movies that these high-end people walk around with, a Bengal tiger. You got to keep that thing on a leash. They're very dangerous animals. Even if they kill an animal that's normal, it's still not comfortable. You got to keep them on a leash. So we're going to put that person into cherem one way or the other. Where do we learn that idea from? That if a person's not willing to cage their animals that they're causing a danger. They belong in Shamta, they belong in Cherem. That's me to Reb Nassan, 4 lines before the end of the parak, the Tanya. The Brisa writes, Reb Nassan Omer, Minayin shalo yegadel adam kelev ro b'soch beso, that a person should not raise a dangerous dog in their home, below ya'amid sulam re'ua b'soch beso, and that a person shouldn't leave a rickety, shaky ladder in their home. You should not leave blood in your home. And that teaches us that if a person's not going to be responsible with their animals, and secondly with the ladders, but we're here focused on the animals, that person will be put into cherem for their lack of responsibility around their animals. We'll stop right here at this end of the parak. Hadran alach elunaros, Baruch Hashem, we finished another parak. We are 950 plus blot into Shas. We should come back to this daf in 7.5 years. Wishing you all a beautiful night.